So last week, we heard about God's promise to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a son, namely Isaac. That promise came true, and of course we also looked at how God's promises to his people have always come true through the ages. So let's fast forward a week. We end up with Jacob fighting someone who can only be assumed to be God. How did we get from Isaac to here? That's a pretty big jump, right? Well, let's take a journey. A nice journey. When Isaac had grown up, Abraham and Sarah, Sarah had passed at this point, but Abraham decided that it would be a good idea to get Isaac a wife. So he sends a servant to go a wife hunting, because that's how things went in those days. So the servant happened upon a well, and there was a woman there, and there was bracelets and a nose ring involved. And long story short, Isaac marries Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah have twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Now these two, you can't pick twins more different than Jacob and Esau. Because I went to Comic-Con this weekend, so this is going to make sense. Esau is like the Hulk. He's big, he's scary, he says Esau smash a lot. This is Esau. He's a big, strong hunter guy. And then there's Jacob. Now Jacob is like Iron Man. See, Jacob isn't the biggest or the strongest, but he's smart. He's also completely devoid of morals, just like Iron Man. So these two really can't be more different. Jacob gets named Jacob because he stuck an arm out first, and then Esau was the firstborn. But Jacob got it. It's just, you can't, one, ow. Two, this is how the story goes. So Jacob is completely devoid of morals, and Esau, while big and strong, doesn't seem to be that smart. Because one day, Esau is coming home from hunting, and he's hungry. And Jacob says, I'll sell you a bowl of soup for your birthright. And Esau buys it. He has a bowl of soup and gives up all his rights as firstborn to Jacob. Esau smash, okay. A little bit later, when Isaac was old and couldn't see very well and was getting close to death, it was time to give out the fatherly blessing to the sons. The firstborn tends to get a better blessing than the not firstborn because they're the firstborn. So Jacob and his mother schemed together to make Jacob look, feel, and smell like Esau. And so Jacob, with the help of his mother, cons Esau out of not just the birthright for a bowl of soup, which is a double portion of the inheritance. So this means that Jacob gets 2/3 of all of Isaac's stuff instead of Esau. And now has conned him out of the fatherly blessing. Now at this point, Jacob has a moment of clarity and says, when Esau finds out about this, he's going to smash me. And he runs away. He camps out in the middle of nowhere and has a dream involving a staircase where God gives him a very similar promise to what God gave Abraham. That his descendants would be numerous and that that all the world would be blessed through him. This is the beginning of Jacob shifting from being as morally bankrupt as Iron Man into being more like a Captain America type. But this is a long process. Jacob then shows up at his cousin's place. Because, when you're in trouble and you have nowhere else to go, where else but family? So he shows up at his cousin Laban's farm and sees Rachel, Laban's daughter, who is also his cousin-ish. Because When you read through all these genealogies and find out just who was related to who and who married what relation, the family tree comes out a little bit crooked. So he sees Rachel, he falls immediately in love, is completely blinded by everything else going around him because Rachel is so lovely and he is so much in love with her. There's only one problem. He's got nothing. He has absolutely nothing with which to buy her, because that's how this process worked. If you had basically, you gave the bride's dad money and you got the bride. Aren't you glad things have changed? So, because Jacob has nothing, he's got to work up somehow to pay Laban for Rachel. So he says, I'll work for you for 7 years. And he does. 7 years pass. He's working for Laban the whole time. They get married. He wakes up the next morning, and he's not married to Rachel. Now, I don't know how in the world he got this confused. Because he wakes up and he's married to Rachel's much less attractive sister, Leah. How do you do that? How do you go through a whole wedding and not realize who you got married to? But then, Jacob's a little upset at this, but he goes to Laban and says, hey, what's the deal? Laban says, I can't marry off the older daughter before I marry off the younger daughter, so you're going to have to work another 7 years, buddy. And of course, Jacob was so in love with Rachel. It's such a touching story that he works another 7 years. And of course, he totally ignores Leah and just disregards her entirely, right? No, he has 4 kids with her. No, 5 kids? 7 with Leah, 2 with the maidservant, 2 with Rachel's maidservant, and then 2 more with Rachel. He obviously wasn't too put out by marrying the wrong woman. So now we've got Jacob with 13 kids, 12 sons and 1 daughter. And Jacob ends up being successful. It makes Laban mad. He runs away. And finally he decides, well, you know what I better do? I better see if Esau's still mad at me. He probably is, though. So let's be careful. So he sends over a whole bunch of stuff to Esau. Whole bunch of stuff. Basically, he's bribing his brother to try to get on his good side. Or at least that's what Jacob thinks he's doing. Finally, he sends all of his family and all the rest of his possessions ahead over the river, and it's just him on the side of a river by himself camping out. And that night, some random guy shows up and picks a fight. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm camping by myself, I don't want someone random coming to pick a fight with me. But apparently Jacob is a much better fighter than I am because he manages to wrestle this person all night long into the morning with a dislocated hip. Now, I've never had a dislocated hip. I've never even had a dislocated shoulder. But I've heard that both of them are incredibly excruciating experiences. I can't imagine carrying on wrestling someone with a dislocated anything. And so in the morning, Jacob, who is still wrestling this person, says, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Okay, sure. Apparently you wrestle people in the middle of the night and you want a blessing in the morning. Maybe that's just how it goes. So he says, the person says, well, you've got a new name now. Now your name isn't Jacob, it's Israel, because you've wrestled with God and with men. And at this point, Jacob goes, wait, what? Wait, what's your name? Who did I just wrestle? And the person just goes, don't worry about it. So then, of course, Jacob, in another moment of clarity, says, oh, I think I just wrestled God all night. God fights dirty. But of course, he names the place, I saw the face of God, because he saw the face of God and lived. Now, it's interesting to me that of all the names for God to call what will become his people, he called them, he struggles with God. Isn't that cute? Because if you pay attention to Israel's history, you know that it's a very, very appropriate name. He struggles with God. Because over and over again, that's what the people of Israel do. They struggle with God. It's one of the reasons why the book of Judges is so much fun, because you watch 12 times their struggle with God. Through the entire Old Testament, you watch Israel struggling with God. And even today now, we find ourselves as God's people still struggling with God. It's not always easy to follow God, is it? It is indeed a struggle. We find ourselves going after everything else. We find ourselves sometimes feeling a lot like young Jacob with his moral bankruptcy, going from this to that to this other thing and over here and up there and down there and everywhere but what we should be focusing on. Because we struggle with God. Names in the Bible are very important things, and this one is a good one. Because we can see in everything that we do, in every way that we walk, how this struggle plays out. It's why it's so important that the very first thing we do when we come to church on Sunday morning is what? After the very first part of the actual church service, after the sports update, is what? Confession. We're telling God that, yes, we struggle with you. We don't follow you as good as we could. We'd like to do better. Help us out. And then the whole rest of the service, as we look at God's word, as we receive God's sacrament in Holy Communion, and then as we remember our baptisms, it's to strengthen us so that we will struggle less. The things that we do here on Sunday morning are to strengthen us as we go out into the world, a world that wants us to struggle with God, so that we might not struggle quite so hard. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive. You think, if I'm going to get stronger, then it means we fight more, right? But the strengthening that God does for us is to strengthen us for his service. Strengthen us to follow him more closely. Strengthen us to do his will as we go out in the world. That's what the Christian walk really is, after all. As we walk following God more closely, we become more like Jesus. We become more like him, and so we don't have to struggle so much. And we can say, like Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't really want to go this way, but not my will, but yours. Our Christian walk is trusting in God's promise every day. Trusting in this promise that we will, in the new creation, be made perfect like Christ. And there will be no more struggle with God. When all of God's people will be restored to him, and there will be no more sin. Because the promise that God made to us for eternal life is also a promise to take away the struggle that we have because of sin. It's a promise for us of a true, perfect world, a sinless world, just for us, a place in God's house forever.